I was 28, head over heels, planning my perfect Charleston wedding to the man I adored. My parents, my rock, were even paying for the venue. Then, weeks before we sent invitations, my fiancé dropped a bombshell. His parents, who'd barely hidden their disdain for my family's humble background, had forbidden my parents from attending. He actually expected me to just accept it. What followed was a masterclass in gaslighting, narcissistic manipulation, and a son so deep in his mother's pocket he couldn't see he was destroying everything. But they underestimated one thing: a Southern woman scorned. This isn't just a breakup story, it's about unmasking a toxic family system, reclaiming my power, and serving up a dish of karma so satisfying it's almost as sweet as pecan pie. From the historic streets of Charleston to the cold reality of betrayal, watch how I turn their nightmare demands into my ultimate triumph. The humid Charleston air, usually so comforting with its scent of pluff mud and jasmine, felt heavy, oppressive, like a shroud settling over my dreams. I was 28, a marketing executive with a penchant for shrimp and grits, and a heart full of love for my fiancé, Ethan. He was 30, a charming architect with eyes the color of the Carolina sky after a summer storm, and a pedigree that his mother, Eleanor Ashworth, never let anyone forget. We were supposed to be married in 6 weeks, at the historic Wycliffe House, a place that whispered tales of old Southern romance. My parents, bless their hard-working hearts, had generously offered to pay for the venue, a significant gesture that had brought tears to my eyes. The invitations, elegant cream cardstock with gold calligraphy, were stacked on my mahogany desk, waiting for stamps. We were supposed to send them out by the end of the week, but nearly 10 days ago, Ethan had dropped a bomb that shattered my world more effectively than any Civil War cannon. We were at our apartment in a beautifully restored building on Trad Street, the late afternoon sun slanting through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. I was idly flipping through a bridal magazine, occasionally asking Ethan's opinion on centerpiece ideas, which he usually met with an indulgent smile and a "whatever makes you happy, Ava." This time, however, his smile was strained. He cleared his throat, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize. "Ava, honey, we need to talk about the guest list." "Oh? Did your Aunt Mildred finally decide she can make it from Vermont?" I asked, still blissfully unaware of the precipice I was teetering on. "No, not exactly," he said, avoiding my gaze, fiddling with a loose thread on the upholstered arm of his chair. "It's about your parents." A tiny knot of unease formed in my stomach. My parents? What about them? Dad's already practiced his toast about 100 times, and Mom's found the perfect mother of the bride dress. Ethan took a deep breath. "My mother, well, my parents. They don't think it's appropriate for your parents to attend the wedding." The magazine slipped from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the antique rug. I stared at him, convinced I'd misheard. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" "Look, Ava," he rushed on, the words tumbling out, "it's not me, it's them. They feel strongly about this. After that dinner a few weeks ago, they don't think your parents align with the tone set your parent is set for our life together." The tone? My parents? My wonderful, loving, down-to-earth parents who had welcomed Ethan into their home with open arms and endless Tupperware containers of my mom's famous chicken bog. My dad, a retired history teacher who could talk your ear off about Fort Sumter, and my mom, a nurse whose compassion knew no bounds. They weren't Ashworth material, apparently. This was Eleanor's doing, I knew it. She, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair, her cuttingly polite remarks, and her belief that anyone whose ancestors hadn't arrived on the Mayflower, or at least owned a substantial plantation by 1750, was practically a barbarian. "Ethan, that's the most ridiculous, insulting thing I've ever heard," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. "I'm on excellent terms with my parents. I'm their only child. Dad is supposed to walk me down the aisle, for God's sake. What on earth happened at that dinner to make your parents say something so monstrous?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Mom said your father was a bit loud. And your mother kept asking Eleanor about her charity work in a way Mom found prying. And they apparently made some comments about how they raised you to be independent and speak your mind, which Mom took as a slight against her, implying she didn't raise me to be a supportive wife." This was gaslighting at its finest. I had been at that dinner. My dad is enthusiastic, his laugh booming, but it's infectious, not offensive. My mom, genuinely interested in Eleanor's philanthropic endeavors, which as far as I could tell, mostly involved chairing committees for galas that raised money for other galas, had simply been trying to make conversation. And their comments about raising me to be independent? That was their pride, their belief in equipping their daughter to navigate the world. Eleanor Ashworth, a woman whose primary occupation seemed to be managing her inherited wealth and social calendar, had twisted every innocent remark, every gesture of warmth, into a calculated offense. And Ethan, my Ethan, was her mouthpiece. "I cannot believe you're even repeating this nonsense, Ethan," I seethed. "My parents were lovely. Your mother was the one making thinly veiled digs about our modest upbringing and asking if my dad found teaching fulfilling enough, given the remuneration. My parents were nothing but gracious." "You see things differently, Ava," he said, a patronizing tone creeping into his voice. "My parents have a certain perspective, and they're very clear they don't want your parents there. And honestly, if it means peace in the family, our new family, maybe it's a sacrifice we have to consider." A sacrifice I had to consider, he meant. The narcissism of Eleanor Ashworth was breathtaking. To demand the exclusion of the bride's parents from their own daughter's wedding, and the codependency of her son, willing to inflict such cruelty to appease her, was equally appalling. "Absolutely not," I stated, my voice dangerously calm. "There will be no wedding without my parents. If they're not welcome, then this whole thing is off." I was bluffing mostly. The thought of canceling everything, the shame, the heartbreak, but the alternative was unthinkable. "Don't be dramatic, Ava," he sighed. "Mom just wants what's best for us. She thinks your parents will embarrass us or won't fit in with our social circle." "Our social circle?" I scoffed. "You mean her social circle? The one where everyone's judged by their stock portfolio and their last name? My parents are 10 times the people Eleanor Ashworth will ever be." We argued for hours. It was a massive, gut-wrenching fight. I told him if my parents couldn't be at our wedding, then we'd have to have a separate private ceremony just for them. A petty, desperate suggestion born of fury. He said he'd think about it, which I knew was his way of deflecting. The next day, still reeling, I did something impulsive. If Eleanor Ashworth wanted to be so involved in the decision-making, dictating who could and couldn't attend, then she could damn well contribute financially. My parents had offered to pay for the Wycliffe house, a considerable sum. I scanned the invoice and, with a shaking hand, emailed it directly to Eleanor Ashworth, CCing Ethan, with a curt message. "Since you are so invested in the guest list and the overall tone of the wedding, I assume you'll be covering the venue costs now that my parents' attendance is in question." Effectively negating their generous offer. It was a childish move, I knew, driven by hurt and anger. But damn, it felt good for about 5 minutes. The fallout was immediate. Ethan called me that evening, his voice tight with controlled rage. "What in God's name did you think you were doing, Ava, sending that bill to my mother? She's furious. She called you insolent, ungrateful, and utterly lacking in class." "And what did you say, Ethan?" I challenged. "Did you defend me? Did you tell her that perhaps demanding I uninvite my own parents was what truly lacked class?" "You put me in an impossible position," he yelled. "You had no right to try and guilt-trip my parents into paying for anything. You need to apologize to her, immediately." "Apologize?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "I will do no such thing. If they have the audacity to demand my parents be excluded, they can have the decency to foot the bill. It's their son's wedding too, isn't it? Or is this just the Eleanor Ashworth coronation ball, featuring her son and his strategically chosen, parentless bride?" We fought for 3 solid days. The beautiful apartment on Trad Street felt like a war zone. We were barely speaking, the air thick with resentment. I was emotionally exhausted, physically sick from the stress. The thought of marrying into this family, of having Eleanor Ashworth as a permanent fixture in my life, of Ethan continually choosing her over me, made me want to run screaming for the Ashley River. I genuinely considered calling the whole thing off. The wedding, the relationship, everything. What was the point if this was our foundation? Then, on the 3rd night, he broke. He came to me, his eyes red-rimmed, and apologized. He held me, told me he loved me, that we could work through this. He even admitted his parents were being a bit weird and couldn't really justify their demands. He said it was a big day for both of us, and we deserved to be happy, to have our parents there. His apology felt sincere, or maybe I was just desperate to believe it. The trauma bond was strong. Despite the agony he'd put me through, a part of me still clung to the Ethan I thought I knew, the man I'd fallen in love with. I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe he'd finally found his spine. Maybe he'd stand up to Eleanor. We agreed to give it some time, to not talk about it for a few days, to let the dust settle before deciding how to proceed with his parents. I was an idiot, a complete lovesick idiot. Last night, he came home from work looking shifty. That nervous throat-clearing thing was back with a vengeance. "Ava," he began, "I've been thinking, and I've made a decision." My heart sank. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't going to be good. "I canceled the Wycliffe house," he announced as if discussing the weather. I just stared at him. You what? "Yeah, we'll just have the wedding in our backyard here. It's a lovely garden, much more intimate. And since there's no venue fee, there's no need for your parents to be involved financially, and therefore," he gave a tight little smile that didn't reach his eyes, "no real reason for them to attend if it's going to cause such friction with my family." I was dumbstruck, speechless. The layers of betrayal were suffocating. He'd gone behind my back, canceled our dream venue, a place we'd chosen together, a place my parents were paying for. He'd done it without consulting me, and his justification? It was so twisted, so manipulative, it made my head spin. He was essentially saying that my parents' only value, their only ticket to their own daughter's wedding, was their checkbook. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it stole my breath. "Our backyard?" I finally managed, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Ethan, we rent. Our landlady would have an aneurysm if we tried to host a wedding, however intimate, in that tiny patch of grass. And that's beside the point. You canceled our venue, the one you knew I loved, the one my parents, your parents, he snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Is that all you care about? What about my parents' feelings? What about my peace of mind? After you insulted them by sending that bill, I realized you just don't get it, Ava. You're not willing to compromise." "Compromise?" I shrieked, all pretense of calm gone. "You want me to compromise by telling my mother and father they can't come to my wedding because your snobbish, narcissistic mother has deemed them unfit? What universe are you living in, Ethan? The universe where a son respects his parents." He shot back, "And frankly, after what you pulled, after you tried to extort money from them, I don't even feel like getting married anymore. I only waited this long to tell you about the venue because the cancellation took a week to confirm. I wanted to see your face when you realized what you'd pushed me to." His eyes were cold, hard, and in them, I saw not just Eleanor's influence, but his own vindictiveness. These past few days, his apology, his supposed willingness to work things out, it had all been an act, a calculated cruelty. He'd been waiting for the venue cancellation to go through, just to throw it in my face. His revenge for me insulting his parents by expecting them to pay for a wedding they were trying to ruin. The logic was non-existent. "So, this is it then," I said, a strange, icy calm descending over me. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a chilling clarity. "You'd rather destroy our relationship, humiliate me, and break my parents' hearts than stand up to your mother for even a second." He shrugged, a callous, indifferent gesture. "If that's how you want to see it, maybe we're just not compatible. Maybe my mother was right about you all along." That was the final nail. He didn't even try to salvage it. He just parroted Eleanor. "I see," I said softly. "Well, in that case I guess I'll be going." Within the hour I had packed a suitcase, my hands moving with a mechanical efficiency I didn't feel. He watched me, a stony expression on his face, making no move to stop me, no offer of help, no word of regret. He just sat there, in his expensive armchair, the picture of Ashworth arrogance. I landed on my parents' doorstep in Mount Pleasant, a sobbing, incoherent mess. It took a long time for me to calm down enough to explain what had happened. They hadn't known anything beyond my initial fury about the banning suggestion. I'd shielded them from the subsequent fights, hoping Ethan would come to his senses. When I finally choked out the whole sordid tale, the demand, the bill, the fake apology, the canceled venue, Ethan's cold dismissal, their faces were a mixture of shock, fury, and heartbreak. My mom just held me, stroking my hair, while my dad paced the living room, his face flushed, muttering about ungrateful whelps and toxic matriarchs. I knew if I hadn't been in such a fragile state, he would have already been on the phone to Ethan, or possibly driving to Trad Street to give him a piece of his mind, Southern gentleman style, which can be surprisingly intimidating. He He said he only waited to dump me until the venue cancellation was confirmed. As revenge, I sobbed into Mom's shoulder. 2 years, Mom, 2 years of my life, wasted on someone who could be that cruel, that petty. Oh, baby girl, Mom murmured, her own voice thick with emotion. He's not worth one more of your tears. You're free of them. That's a blessing, even if it doesn't feel like it now. The thought of how blissfully unaware I'd been these past few weeks, happily planning details, dreaming of our future, while he was secretly dismantling it, plotting his petty vengeance. It made me physically ill. I felt like such a fool. The learned helplessness I'd felt during those 3 days of fighting had been a precursor to this utter devastation. He had systematically broken me down. I haven't eaten or slept properly since. I keep replaying everything, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I was the one who pushed him too far by sending that bill. Was I the asshole for that? I'd intended to insult them, yes, to make a point. But I never imagined it would detonate our entire lives. My parents, bless them, finally found out the full story of that infamous dinner. Apparently, while Ethan was outside having a smoke, a habit his mother deplored but tolerated in him, and I was in the kitchen wrestling with a stubborn wine bottle, the parental units had gotten to talking. Eleanor, in her oh-so-subtle way, had commented on how lovely it was that I was so attentive in the kitchen, upholding traditional values. She even boasted that her Ethan and her husband, Richard, a man who seemed to exist only as a silent affirming nod to Eleanor's pronouncements, had never needed to set foot in a kitchen their entire lives. My parents, who raised me to believe in partnership and equality, had apparently chuckled. My mom gently explained that I was only cooking that night because I had offered, and that Ethan and I usually shared all household chores including cooking, quite happily. She even mentioned how proud she was of our modern arrangement, where we were true equals. According to Mom, Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows had nearly shot into her hairline. She'd gone very quiet, a dangerous sign. My parents, realizing they'd perhaps offended her sensibilities, hadn't pressed the issue, not wanting to cause a rift before our relationship with the Ashworths had even truly begun. They figured correctly that I was marrying Ethan, not his parents, and as long as he shared our values, his parents' archaic beliefs didn't much matter. Now, of course, they were kicking themselves for not telling me sooner. "We messed up, honey," Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. "We should have told you. We were just trying to keep the peace." "It wouldn't have mattered, Dad," I sighed. "It probably would have just meant me breaking it off with him earlier. Their views are from another century, and clearly Ethan's are too, if he's willing to enforce them like this. What happened was, in a twisted way, for the best. I was still heartbroken, furious, humiliated, but a tiny resilient part of me knew I'd dodged a cannonball, not just a bullet. Marrying into that family, tethered to a man so spineless he'd let his mother dictate the terms of our entire life, would have been a slow, soul-crushing demise. The first thing I had to do, besides grieve, was GTFO of his actual house. I'd moved into his place on Trad Street, but we split the rent. Now, he could have it all to himself. It took me nearly a week to face going back. He hadn't contacted me once since I'd left. Not a text, not a call. Silence. I showed up with boxes and my best friend Chloe, for moral support and muscle. Ethan was there, lounging on the sofa, reading some architectural journal as if nothing was amiss. He didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't acknowledge my presence. The air was thick with his indifference. It was awful. I packed in silence, Chloe occasionally shooting him looks that could curdle milk. I refused to ask for his help. I didn't want to speak to him unless he spoke first. Finally, an hour later, as I was taping up the last box, he looked up. "So," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The wedding expenses. We need to split what we've spent so far." "Not much, thankfully. Flowers, deposits for the cake, photographer. I've calculated your half." He slid a piece of paper across the coffee table. No apology, no remorse, just accounting. "Fine," I said, my voice equally flat. "I'll send you a check." "Good," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Good luck with everything, Ava." "You too, Ethan," I replied, turning my back on him and walking out of that apartment, out of that life, for good. Chloe gave him one last withering glare before following me. Driving away, I wondered if his parents even knew the wedding was off, or if they were still smugly anticipating their appropriately toned event. Knowing what I knew now about that dinner, I was certain they wouldn't approve of me sharing chores with my husband, or probably even working after marriage. Who knew what other delightful 1950s expectations they harbored? And if Ethan was siding with them on this, he'd side with them on everything. This wasn't just a breakup, it was an escape. The closure I needed wasn't an apology from him, but the slamming of that car door. The weeks that followed were a blur of tears, boxed wine, and endless rehashing of every red flag I'd blissfully ignored. Chloe was my rock, alternating between letting me cry on her shoulder and reminding me what a toxic, mother-coddling, spineless jellyfish Ethan Ashworth truly was. Her colorful descriptions, while harsh, were surprisingly therapeutic. My parents were pillars of quiet strength, never once saying "I told you so," even though they'd had their reservations about Eleanor from day one. It took about 3 weeks for the news of our defunct wedding to ripple through our social circles. Since the invitations hadn't gone out, there were no formal announcements to make, just awkward phone calls and text messages to close friends and family who had known about the engagement. I kept my explanation brief: irreconcilable differences. I wasn't ready to air the dirty laundry of Eleanor Ashworth's parental ban. Then, the character assassination began. It started subtly. Mutual acquaintances would mention offhand that Ethan was telling people I was the one who got cold feet, that I was too immature for the commitment of marriage, particularly to someone of his standing. The gaslighting continued, even in his absence, as he tried to rewrite our narrative to paint himself as the wronged party. Chloe, who ran in some of the same professional circles as Ethan, Charleston's a small big town after all, got the juicier details. Apparently Ethan, undoubtedly coached by Eleanor, was spinning a tale of a demanding new money fiancé. That was me, apparently, despite my parents being comfortable but by no means wealthy, who had tried to extort money from his distinguished family and then thrown a tantrum when her unreasonable demands weren't met. He conveniently left out the part about banning my parents. He's telling people you had a meltdown over floral arrangements and tried to force his mother to pay for some ridiculously extravagant display. Chloe fumed one evening over takeout Thai, and that you threatened to call off the wedding if she didn't cough up the cash for the venue after your parents supposedly backed out of paying. The nerve of that silver-spooned weasel. This was classic narcissistic injury followed by a smear campaign. Eleanor, and by extension Ethan, couldn't stand their pristine image being tarnished. Since I hadn't crumbled and begged for forgiveness, they had to make me the villain. They had to control the narrative. The final straw came via a forwarded email. A concerned friend sent it to Chloe, who then, with much hesitation, showed it to me. It was a meticulously crafted message from Eleanor Ashworth herself, sent to a select group of their influential friends, ostensibly to clarify the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the canceled wedding. In it, Eleanor painted a picture of me as a grasping, unstable gold digger who had been emotionally volatile and financially manipulative. She spoke of my charming but ultimately unsuitable family background and lamented how Ethan, in his kindness and naivety, had been taken in. She concluded by expressing her relief that her son had come to his senses before making a catastrophic mistake, and that the Ashworth family was moving forward with grace and discretion. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive character assassination, designed to ruin my reputation in a town where reputation was currency. Reading it, something inside me snapped. The grief and humiliation morphed into a cold, clear fury. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about my name, my integrity, my parents' dignity. They thought they could just erase me, paint me as the villain, and swan off into their privileged sunset. Oh, hell no. This Southern belle had claws, and they were about to find out. That's it, I told Chloe, my voice dangerously calm. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they have no idea who they're messing with. My revenge wasn't going to be about screaming or public confrontations. That was their style. Mine would be more Charleston, strategic, elegant, and devastatingly effective. First, I gathered my evidence. The email from Ethan confirming he'd canceled the venue and his lovely justification. The original venue invoice my parents had been prepared to pay. I even, with a bit of tech-savvy help from a friend, managed to retrieve some deleted texts from early in the argument where Ethan explicitly stated his mother's demand to ban my parents. This wasn't about he said, she said anymore. This was about facts. Next, I thought about Eleanor's Achilles heel, her precious social standing and her carefully cultivated image as a benevolent matriarch and philanthropist. Her entire world revolved around maintaining that facade. The Ashworths were major donors to several prominent Charleston charities, their names splashed across event programs and donor walls. Eleanor chaired the annual Blossoms and Bells Gala for the Charleston Preservation Society, one of the city's most high-profile fundraising events. It was their Super Bowl of social climbing. I remembered my mom's innocent question to Eleanor at that fateful dinner. "Your charity work must be so fulfilling." Eleanor had preened. This was her stage. So I crafted my own email. Not a rant, not an attack, but a calm, factual, and deeply personal account of what had actually transpired. I detailed the initial demand to ban my parents, Ethan's cowardly compliance, my insolent act of sending the venue bill as a direct consequence, his feigned apology, the secret cancellation of the venue as a gotcha, and his parting shot about my parents' attendance being tied to their financial contribution. I attached copies of the supporting evidence, Ethan's incriminating email, the venue invoice, key text message screenshots, and then, the pièce de résistance. I concluded my email with a heartfelt reflection on the values I was raised with: family, loyalty, respect, and equality in a partnership, a subtle nod to the kitchen incident. I contrasted this with the values demonstrated by the Ashworth family. I didn't call them names, I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. I didn't send this email to Eleanor's entire mailing list. That would be too broad, too messy. Instead, I carefully selected about a dozen recipients. These were not just random socialites. They were the key players in Eleanor's philanthropic world, the heads of the charities she supported, fellow committee chairs, major donors whose opinions mattered to her. People who valued integrity and genuine benevolence, not just performative charity. I also included a very influential local journalist known for her society column, but also for her sharp insights and occasional exposés of Charleston's less savory underbelly. I sent it from a new, anonymous-ish email address, signing off simply as a Charleston daughter. The subject line was innocuous, a personal reflection on family values and philanthropy in Charleston. Then I waited. It was like dropping a single, perfectly polished pebble into a very still, very image-conscious pond. The ripples wouldn't be immediate, but they would be significant. Within 48 hours, Chloe started hearing whispers. Apparently, my email had landed like a quiet bomb in certain circles. People were talking, not loudly, not publicly, but the old Charleston telegraph was humming. Eleanor's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. The first concrete sign came a week later. The Charleston Preservation Society discreetly announced a restructuring of the Blossoms and Bells Gala Committee. Eleanor Ashworth was no longer listed as the chair. She was still on the committee, but in a much diminished, almost honorary role. The official reason given was that Eleanor wanted to focus on other philanthropic endeavors, but everyone in the know understood. She'd become a liability. Her brand of benevolence had been exposed as hypocritical. Then, a few of the smaller charities the Ashworths supported started to quietly distance themselves. Their name wasn't quite as prominent on new donor lists. Invitations to certain exclusive events seemed to be lost in the mail. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, but a distinct cooling of the social temperature. This is how social shaming works in polite society. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Ethan, I heard through the grapevine, was also feeling the chill. Some of his wealthier clients, the ones who moved in Eleanor's circles and valued discretion and family values, the genuine kind, not the Ashworth-branded version, suddenly found other architects for their projects. His reputation as a gentleman was taking a hit. People were looking at him differently, seeing not a charming professional, but his mother's puppet. I never publicly acknowledged my email. I never gloated. I simply went on with my life. I threw myself into my work, got a promotion. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually meeting a wonderful, kind, and genuinely supportive man. A local chef with a passion for low-country cuisine, and absolutely no patience for pretentious nonsense. His family welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked about my background or tone. My parents were, of course, quietly thrilled. My dad said, "You didn't just get even, honey, you got smart." My mom just hugged me and said, "You stood up for yourself and for us. That's all that matters." The most satisfying moment, however, came about 6 months later. I was at a farmer's market in Marion Square buying fresh produce when I saw them, Ethan and Eleanor, across the way, examining some overpriced artisanal cheese. They looked diminished. Eleanor's usual regal bearing was slightly stooped, her smile strained. Ethan looked stressed, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Our eyes met, just for a second. I saw a flicker of something in Ethan's, recognition, maybe even a hint of regret. Eleanor just gave me a glare so cold it could have frozen the Santee River. I didn't react, I didn't rear back. I didn't smirk. I simply gave a small, polite, almost imperceptible nod, the kind you give a distant, unimportant acquaintance. Then I turned back to my heirloom tomatoes, my new boyfriend joining me, slipping his arm around my waist, making me laugh. In that moment, I knew I had truly won. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming my narrative, protecting my integrity, and demonstrating that real power isn't about wealth or social standing, but about truth and self-respect. They had tried to silence me, to erase me, to define me by their twisted standards. But I had refused. I had found my voice, and in doing so I had stripped them of their power over me. The learned helplessness they had tried to instill was gone, replaced by a profound sense of empowerment. My boundaries were now cast in iron. The codependent girl who had excused Ethan's behavior was a distant memory. I was Ava, a Charleston daughter, strong, resilient, and happy, and they were just the Ashworths, a fading photograph in a dusty album of Charleston society, a cautionary tale whispered over afternoon tea. Sometimes, when the jasmine blooms and the Charleston air is thick with promise, I think about that canceled wedding, not with bitterness but with a strange sense of gratitude. Ethan's betrayal, Eleanor's cruelty, they were the harsh pruning that allowed me to grow stronger, to blossom into the woman I was always meant to be. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. Living my best life, authentically and joyfully, far from the suffocating shadow of their elitist world. And every now and then, when I hear a particularly juicy piece of gossip about Eleanor Ashworth's latest social slight or Ethan's dwindling client list, I can't help but smile, just a little. Southern fury, after all, is best served cold, with a side of sweet tea and undeniable success. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch.